Hello, I can see your message, so that means it's working. Let's keep it let's keep it working, Twitch. All right. So, before I get started, as I did last time, I just want to highlight that this reading, this commentary, is in order to promote Gadir's family, who is Cassandra the Lesbian's sister in Gaza. And they can really use whatever help you have to give right now to keep going, to get the necessities of life, to take care of their family. She really, like many, I'm not saying she's unique in this situation, but I am saying that this is, on a personal level. So that's why I'm trying to do whatever I can to promote this GoFundMe, a fundraiser. And what you're seeing on the screen right now is a link to that GoFundMe. On my Tumblr blog, you can see a link that explains a bit more of the GoFundMe if you want a bit more information, or you can, of course, read the actual fundraiser on that website. Scan the QR code or, type in that link. Either way, it'll take you directly to the GoFundMe. I would highly encourage everybody who is enjoying this reading to please check it out. And donate 5, 10, 15 upwards. Anything is really helpful. So in that regard, let's begin the story. Oh, and thank you, Cassandra the Lesbian, for your offer. I will connect through Discord if necessary. Down Among the Dead Man is by Sylvia Fekete. Oh goodness, I feel terrible. Fekete Security, I believe. I'll have to double check that afterwards. I should have practiced that ahead of time. I don't want to offend. It's just not a surname I'm not familiar with, so I'll have to familiarize myself with it. Here we go. He'd done everything he could to avoid being drafted into the funeral guard. Swapping duties, extra shifts, tasteful bribes, nothing had worked. Audric's friends in the city watch had assumed it was the tedium he hated, and Audric, embarrassed, let them. Now, spear straight, he listened to the old priest's surprisingly hale voice boom off the stonework with prayers for a dead man. This paints a very romantic picture of a funeral service, and it continues to do so as we read on, but I wonder the level of which is geared towards nobility versus what is the norm for anyone in Navarra. In some ways, I kind of wish it was a common person who's the dead in this story, just so we could get that voice, but not a complaint. The story is very good. I enjoy it as it is. And the Maker, clad in the majesty of the sky, set foot to earth, and at his touch all warring ceased. Audric hadn't known the dead nobleman, but Penric Carn's funeral was well attended. A few mourners appeared genuinely heartbroken. Audric kept his gaze away from their red eyes and grief-twisted faces, maintaining a respectfully balanced stare into the middle distance. From every corner of the earth the chant of light echoed, and the Maker walked the land. Audric's eyes wandered to the majesty of the copper-tiled vaults. This temple complex had been built to celebrate the retaking of Navarran lands, 365 towers helmed by King Caspar II, long may he rest. I am I'm just gonna say this right up front. I am diagnosing Audric as autistic, by the way, folks. It is so obvious to me, and I promise you'll see why as we keep going, if you haven't heard this story before. That it was a marvel among the city of marvels didn't diminish the glittering craftsmanship. What did sour it was the dead man on the bier behind him. Audric squirmed at the thought of the hollow pits that were his eyes. Curiosity, his father had said in their clay-walled home on the outskirts of the city. That was Audric's trouble. Curiosity and too much schooling for a boy that wakes up crying from nightmares, my lad. By the Maker's will, I decree harmony in all things. Audric had grown out of those nightscapes as he had entered the tedium of a guardsman. He missed them in an odd way, their crooked sceneries, their strange terrors that had felt tailored only to him. The vaults here had faint echoes of that majesty, blurred greatly by memory and time. Ooh, I like that description. Blurred but greatly by memory and time. Yeah, like I said, it's romantic, and I wonder how much of that is Audric's perspective versus actual Navarra, because Audric, of course, is approaching this from a very appealed look at architectural art. Lost in a gloomy churn of thoughts, Audric didn't hear the whisper of silk on the bier as the priest thundered the end of the chant. He missed the crowd's faces turning quizzical, then horrified. Let balance be restored and the world given eternal life. But Audric would always remember the moment a withered hand grasped him by the shoulder, and a corpse in jangling gold crunched its teeth into his neck. Jangling gold. This description of jangling gold, it makes me so curious, again, what else would be normal to decorate a body with in Navarra, because not everybody's going to have gold. What happened then? The older mage tilted a pot of tea encouragingly towards Audric. The younger mage, a woman with pulled black hair and a severe gaze, sipped her own tea and regarded the guardsman silently. Audric shook his head. He didn't feel like tea, particularly, while his eyes soaked in the room. He'd never been in a necromancer's study before. Ornately decorated skulls hung from the hooks in the high, dark ceiling. One wall was made up of shelves with books and tiny labeled drawers. The other was fronted by tables full of bubbling flasks, scales, alembics, and tortured-looking glass. A smartly attired servant ground away with pestle and mortar. Despite himself, Audric's eyes kept settling there. Please don't mind Manfred, the older mage refilled his own cup. He'll finish mixing that tincture before you know it. Do you think Manfred dresses himself in smart attire, or does Emmerich play dress-up with him, I wonder? Also, in light of the recent screenshots shared from the Veilguard, we get to see what is very likely Emmerich's quarters in the lighthouse. It's reminiscent of this description of his study here. So I wonder how much he took from his study into the lighthouse, or if he rebuilt his collection. Manfred, a clean-boned skeleton, held up a bowl. Audric read something helpful in the cant of its skull. The younger mage looked critical. It needs half a cup more elf root. The corpse pulled out one of the drawers on the far side of the room, took out a withered root, and shook it inquiringly. The royal elf root, please. Manfred moaned and fumbled at more drawers. I'm sorry, this picture of Manfred, I'm so endeared by him already, just from what we've seen from the Veilguard's previews and this description. I love Manfred already. Every mage in the Kingdom of Navarra was part of the Mortalitasi, a group that trained the gifted in the mysteries of magic. Wow! Well, we have yet another case of mages who are completely chill citizens when not locked away in a circle. Who'd have thought? They served as Navarra's arcane protectors and priests. Within the Mortalitasi was a group of select mages invited into an old fraternity called the Morn Watch. The Watchers served as elite guardians, keepers of the Grand Necropolis and its sacred repository of the dead. Yes, that's the one, the older mage beamed. Very good indeed, Manfred. This was the first time Audric had met a Watcher. They had been the picture of courtesy, but Audric thought it would be futile to explain to them what the sight of a skeleton ambling under its own power did to a simple guardsman. Now, where were we? Audric dragged his gaze back to the older Watcher across from him, with his silvered hair, tidy mustache, and long face full of concern. His expression reminded Audric of the Chantry scholars when they'd caught him reading by candlelight in the library. The good brothers and sisters had kindly tried to dissuade Audric from living in pages for so long he couldn't think straight come morning. It never worked. Is there anything else you can recall about Lord Carn's funeral? The mage asked gently. No, I think not much, sir. Another guard, Della even had to peel him off me, sir. The necromancer waved a hand. Emmerich will do, please. Audric nodded absently, touching the bandage on his neck. It's a blur of screams, sir. Yeah, this is, okay, I won't spoil the twist in this story, the big twist, but it's really interesting. Remember this scene because there will be called back to it. Some of it your own, I'd bet, the necromancer joked, but looked so sympathetic Audric relaxed by a degree. Yes, sir. He had screamed, falling to the floor as the snapping, well-dressed corpse dug into his shoulders. He'd screamed as Della tried to pry it off and was smacked into the altar for her trouble. He'd screamed as he braced a boot against the corpse rib cage and kicked it over and over. The Morn Watch can see to this, Guardsman Audric, the younger mage commented. This is our bailiwick. You are fully committed to this venture? I like Myrna, how she uses words like bailiwick. Like, is this just typical for Morn Watchers to be like this scholarly group of people, or are these two just particularly professor stereotypically like? I know people are very excited for Emmerich, obviously. I really hope that Myrna makes an appearance, and I have a strong suspicion she will in the Veilguard. As a supporting NPC, I mean. Yeah, I think I agree with you, Neopho. I think Myrna and Emmerich hang out with each other for a reason. I'd love to see, like, if the other Morn Watchers are in this vein, or if they're just, like, very special. Audric tried to recall how she'd been introduced. He'd been trying to stay as far away from possible from Manfred at the time. Poor Manfred. The captain, well, they want the city guard to be involved, madam, Audric said. What the captain had actually said was, that bloody ceremonial duty is supposed to be ceremonial, and make sure those musty corpse botherers bury Karn's body before his family blames us somehow for this. And then she had said, rather unexpectedly, patted him sympathetically and gingerly on the shoulder. If I can ask, if it's all right, Audric fumbled. He'd never dealt with necromancers face to face, outside seeing them at funerals. Do you know what's been going on? Premature possession, the younger watcher said crisply. The older one, Emmerich, nodded. It must be, but that should be nigh impossible this close to the Grand Necropolis. How come? Audric asked. Excellent question. Emmerich swirled the tea in his mug, looking too cheerful, Audric thought, for a man framed by so many racks of skulls. Are we going to get a tea versus coffee debate from Emmerich and from Nev and Lucanus, I wonder? That would be fun. The simple explanation is the wards inside the crypts deter most minor errant spirits. Penric Karn is either a man of great and unfulfilled passions, or very unlucky. The necromancer took a swallow. After the funeral, Karn's corpse was spotted heading towards the necropolis. It would be easier to locate him if we had any remains, but there was very sparse material left as his body was displayed. I'm just going to take a quick drink, sorry. Audric reached into his pocket and brought out a handkerchief. He unrolled its contents onto the polished desk. Will this do? The younger watcher raised one thin eyebrow. Myrna, that was it. Her name was Myrna. I found it, got it in the fight, madam, with Lord Karn. Woke up with it scraping my palm. Myrna picked up the curved rib bone. One end was jagged from where Audric's boot had connected with Karn's rib cage. She handed it to Emmerich. Excellent. Emmerich, this is your remit. I'll have it ready before sunset, he sighed. It would be faster if we managed to replace the librarian by now. The students have naturally left the books in a mess. Oh my god. Can you imagine having Emmerich as your professor? I'm just saying. That would be really cool. I feel like he'd be like one of those how do you do fellow kids, hip, cool professors. That's the vibe I get from him, at least. I don't know how accurate it'll turn out to be, but we shall see, of course. Myrna nodded and swept the floor, robes flaring. Guardsmen, come along. What for? A gentle inquiry into the manner of Penrick Carn's death. My brother was stabbed to death by Duke Janus van Markham in an alley. Audric was already wilting under Ivona Carn's hawkish gaze. Are you sure, Lady Carn? Utterly. It's only the guard was never told. I don't think the captain knows how he... What of it? The deceased Lord Carn's older sister sniffed, her handsome face wrinkling in disdain. I really, really like the casual use of the word handsome here to describe a woman. Like, we need more of that. Give me more pretty men and handsome women. Why should I let the details of my brother's death become the barracks gossip? Janus was a bitter rival of Penrick's. They bumped into each other at a drinking establishment, overindulged, and bickered about who'd slain more dragons on the field. Then they fought and disgraced both our houses by killing each other on a common public street. Can you imagine being a spectator of that? Oh my god. But the bodies. I arranged for the footmen to deliver my brother's body to the priests. The Van Markhams did the same for Janus. Lady Carn scowled. The involvement of the city guard in a matter of private grief seemed most unnecessary. Audric rallied. Were there any witnesses to Lord Carn's death? A staff of the tavern, my brother's attendants, Janus's attendants, and several passers-by who stopped to watch the sport. Myrna's presence had meant Lady Carn couldn't turn away. The Morn Watchers had absolute authority over funerary dead, but the noblewoman had practically ground her teeth when inviting them into her parlor. Frilly and gilded, Audric couldn't help to note, in that Orlesian style that was all the rage in the free marches 40 years ago. This really reminds me of that meme of that guy judging wealthy people's homes, like, I can never afford this, you should have better taste than me. Lady Carn rose. If this has wound to its end, my household is still in mourning. One last inquiry, Lady Carn, Myrna said. Was there a similar disturbance at Duke Janus's funeral? Was it as restless as Lord Carn's? Lady Carn glared. Duke Janus was interred into the winged halls of the great necropolis a day before my brother's funeral, without incident or delay. I promise, guardsman, you will be perfectly safe by my side. Audric hung back from a set of massive stone gates. They were lit by braziers and flanked by statues of robed and skull-faced men. Carved in a style favored in the Exalted Age, Audric's memory inanely remind him. Basalt from northern Ferelden, onyx inlays from Cumberland. Note how precisely the light falls on the skulls. Again, it creates this picture of what we've seen in screenshots from the Veilguard so strongly, and maybe I'm influenced by those pictures, like, helping out in that regard, but I really, really see the Necropolis' statues here. I think this story uses Audric's special interest in architecture to its fullest, in that it paints a beautiful picture of the surroundings as the story goes. By weaving it into the story, it feels very real. Why would Lord Carn go into the necropolis? Audric crossed his arms, hoping they didn't start to shake. I don't understand. Why not let himself be buried if he wanted inside? The Mortalitasi believe that when someone dies, an inhuman spirit is pushed out from the Fade into our world. Myrna waved a gloved hand at the panorama of the Grand Necropolis, whose upper levels could be seen past the gates quarried into the stone. In exchange, we invite those inhuman spirits to house themselves in the empty bodies left behind. Correct? Audric shrugged. It was such common knowledge he didn't see her point. Of course, outside Navarra, most nations burned their dead instead of entombing them. Even Audric, with no love of corpses, found the thought disturbing. I like this. I like that it's a nice touch of a different cultural viewpoint still held by someone like Audric, who is, he's disturbed by the dead, but he still believes in the common Navarran practice because that's the culture he was raised in. Similarly, people outside Navarra, we know, find the Navarran cultural practice of entombing the dead to be disturbing. So, yeah, it's just interesting. Less well known is that if a more vigorous spirit claims the corpse, it may become enmeshed in that man or woman's unfinished business. Whatever Lord Karn's goal, it must be something that would disturb the necropolis, or it could lie within a part of forbidden end to the dead. Or it could lie within a part forbidden even to the dead. Audric shuddered. Something on a causeway past the gates was coming towards them. And the spirit driving him is a strong one indeed, Myrna added. I'll be no good down there, madam, Audric blurted. Why? I'm sorry, I don't do well with the dead, madam. Why not? Audric shrugged helplessly. They make me uncomfortable, ever since I was young. I get nervous round corpses, madam. You are in the wrong place then, Audric. Fascinating. Myrna looked oddly intrigued. Then I must apologize for my choice of transportation. Oh, this is so cool. This is so cool. A carriage rattled up. Audric gripped his spear. The horses were bare skeletons with coronas of sickly surging green fire. The pair stamped as they drew up. Audric stepped back as a horse swung its bony head around, as if mimicking a living curiosity. What I find curious about this curiosity is this is a spirit obviously inhabiting the skeleton of a horse. So this spirit is literally taking on the characteristics of a horse. Like, how does that influence work? Because we know when spirits, say, take hold of a tree, they become sylvans, and they're basically monsters. They don't suddenly become just like a chill tree, except for the case, I guess, of that riddling tree in Dragon Age Origins. But, like, could you just have, like, skeleton pets? They probably exist in Navarra now, according to this. That's so cool. I can't be the only one who thinks that's cool. Maybe I'm just, like, really morbid. I don't know. Just imagine, like, having, a pet cat who died, and then you get, like, that zombie cat still walking around your house. I don't know. Madam, Audric's voice was strangled. Myrna's face was half shadowed by the bulk of the carriage, rimmed by that spectral light. The appraising look on her face threw Audric back to being called to the Chantry Mother's office in trouble, the squirming sensation of being measured in a way all his reading hadn't prepared him for. This must be your choice. Myrna lit into the carriage, skirts brushing on the lacquer black frame. Only answer one question. The inside of the carriage was dark and curtained. Myrna's voice issued from plush shadows. Would not a guardsman who's recited the history of every stone and every promenade we've passed regret passing up the chance to see the architecture of the Grand Necropolis? Weaponizing his autism, Myrna, that's not cool. I'm trying to think what I could be lured into. If somebody like waved, my favorite superhero or something in front of me, like, hey, come into this dark cavern. You can meet Danny Moonstar. I'd probably be like, yeah, okay. I didn't know I was talking out loud, Audric muttered, clinging to a handhold as the carriage pelted down a track circling the necropolis's open-air mausoleums. You mumble. Myrna seemed more relaxed now that they were on their way. I am impressed by the specificity of your knowledge. The Chantry taught me letters. Ivy-smoothed archways whipped by. Then the horses plunged down a thoroughfare lined with human-sized urns. I kept some books. Architectural art seems to be your passion. Yes, madam. And you have excellent recall. Given your apparent zeal, I'm surprised you didn't join the Chantry Scholars. Audric thought of those old rooms of books with a pang, followed by a darker current. Coughing in poorly lit rooms by the river, a year-long fever haunting his parents and cousins. A guard makes enough to feed their family, madam. I relate to this quite a lot, actually. I think in another life I would have done well in university. I can understand where Audric's coming from. You kind of yearn for what could have been had life circumstances not gotten in the way. Forever, I think, probably. Myrna seemed content to leave things there and took something out of a velvet purse, a rib bone. Emmerich prepared your trophy for us. His cathexis is very reliable. Audric felt the ground tilt down slope. Madam? His magic. She tapped the rib bone. This will now guide us to where Lord Carnes fled. Emmerich would join us, but he's been called to other matters. The carriage swung down a tunnel. Audric felt the ears pops, and sensation he recognized from swimming in lakes as a child. That can't be right. We've only started traveling down. What, pardon me, madam, was more urgent than the body loose in the Grand Necropolis? Her cheek quirked. Our chief issue will be sorting him out from the others. Just a big old undead party down there, I guess. They finally craned to a halt. Somehow, in the sunless tunnel, was a row of pale winlows. Their drooping branches formed a silent bower leading to a cage over a square, dark pit. Have you ever been to the necropolis? Myrna asked as she stepped out, unlatching the cage's gate. Audric thought about his parents. Twice. We will be going deeper than the public gardens. The necromancer snapped a finger. The cage clattered as if it were being shaken by something deep below. Touch nothing, make little sound, and do not wander. Yes, madam. Audric touched the bandage on his neck again, and tried very hard not to look at the stamping skeletal horses. Madam, when we see Lord Carn. Yes? Audric rubbed his neck, feeling more than a little resentment at the thought of the man. It was as if all the terror from the funeral was slowly transmuting into outrage. He's a mean biter in death, madam. How do we rope his sorry lordship back with us? A platform rose up, slamming into place inside the cage with what sounded to Audric like a very final thud. We'll ask him, guardsman. Politely. Well, this story has a lot to go yet, so I think we all know how that's gonna work. And yeah, mean biter is quite the description, but I really find it interesting. Again, this is a call forward into the revelation surrounding Audric, how he's really fighting back some anger there. Very interesting. The cage had been descending for a minute, its chains shuddering and groaning. Audric strained to see the levels they passed through the gloom. Here was the lower parts of the open-air gardens, but they'd gone down below them already. Surely. The necropolis's geography is a tangle. Audric startled. Myrna was beside him, closer than he'd realized. She put a steadying hand on his shoulder. Audric was further surprised to feel the warmth of it through Myrna's glove, even a heartbeat after she removed the hand. It subtends in unexpected ways. I can't take your meaning, madam. The lower halls and chambers of the Grand Necropolis are not always in the same place at the same time. Okay, I know I'm wrapped up in how interesting the idea of like a labyrinth living in the Grand Necropolis, basically. But I also think it's just very sweet and cute of Myrna to calm Audric down by telling him about, like, what she knows of structural things in the Grand Necropolis, because she knows now that that's something he's passionate about. Very cute. The lift went past another level. Audric stepped back as he saw skeletons in armor trudging sightlessly between rows of crypts. Their rotting clothing had the Watcher's stamp on it. Some sort of undead guard? Powerful magic, madam. Oh, yes. Myrna took out the rib bone, turning it over and over in her hands. Audric was fairly certain she was looking at something he couldn't see. The deeper we travel, the more pronounced the effect becomes. Myrna snorted, a sound Audric hadn't expected from her. There's a reason even the canniest of thieves have never pilfered past the lift jolted, stopped. A voice screeched up the shaft. Interlopers! Mouldering busybodies! Wretched gall-filled vermin! Myrna sighed. Lord Karn, I presume? You'd chain me back up in that box before my honor is restored. Your body and spirit are at odds, Myrna said pleasantly, as if they were speaking in a market. I've come to correct this. Bah! Audric looked around, attempting to pinpoint where Karn's voice was coming from. He was perturbed to realize it was echoing from inside his own head. Lord Karn seems to be, how's he talking, madam? Audric whispered. He's had time to reconstitute himself, Myrna replied. I suspect a spirit of pride moves his lips. And I want to point out, she says spirit of pride, not demon of pride. And I think that's really reflective of how the Mournwatch probably views the nature of spirits. Because she's very, how shall I put this? She's consistent with that. So it's not just a one-off thing. And it makes me suspect that it was purposeful to be written that way. No, the force of it rocked the lift. I am myself. I am Penric Karn, Death of Dragons, favorite of the kings of Navarra. The spirit's voice reached a fevered peak. Join the dead and you hold so dear, and leave me to my work. Something rattled the top of the cage and made a sharp, chiming snap. Then the lift fell. Guardsmen! Myrna grabbed Audric again. There was a sickening whip, 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 as entrances flashed past the lift's doors too fast to see. Audric looked at her in terror, but through the screaming plummet, Myrna's eyes were fastened on those squares of light. Corpse glow flickered. Hold fast! Audric's neck prickled, and there was a wrench. Audric hit stone. The Mournwatcher slid to a stop beside him. This was a vaulted corridor. Fine marble finished by sand polished, his mind chattered, and there's a bronze trim on those sconces of green fire. A few lengths away was the lift shaft. Broken chains whipped past, followed by nothing, then a distant crashing boom. Dust billowed out, coating them both. Myrna coughed into a handkerchief. Audric pulled himself up, saw he was braced on a tomb, and almost fell again, letting go. As the dust settled, Myrna wiped her face, tucking away the handkerchief, and turned to face Audric. Guardsmen, I fear we face a slight delay. Pal, you almost died, in other words. That sleight of hand she'd used in the lift, Myrna explained, could only whisk people about a step or two. She had no spell that would magic them above ground. They would have to return the long way. After, she emphasized this, they dealt with Lord Karn. Where is he now? Audric asked. Was that him inside the lift? Karn cast forth a shadow. Pride has the power to make itself known where it is unwanted, and I am sure it is the spirit of pride that has possession of Lord Karn's remains. Seems so, madam. Audric looked around, still dazed. The delayed fright warred with a fascination with the statelessness of his surroundings. This place was beyond antique. He peered up at a cornice carved with skulls merrily staring back down. The grainy stone looked as if it was at least from the Tower Age. Did the Grand Necropolis go back that far? Audric considered it, then another light thought intruded. Lord Karn, madam. He's tried to kill me twice. Unfortunate, Myrna agreed. Do you know where we are? Yes, she replied, then added, approximately. A wind suddenly whipped through the corridor, rattling dried flowers tied in sheaths to the crypt. Madam? I hear it. Stay by me. Be still. The sconce's fires dimmed. Audric backed into Myrna, who'd gone still herself. Voices leaked through the air, which seemed to darken in a fashion unrelated to light. The sounds grew louder, witless gibbering that sounded like words but slipped away just before being understood. Very spooky. It came from all around, as if they were in a crowd, and underneath the mutters Audric heard something more, a predatory droning crawling nearer. Eventually, it faded. A frown pinched Myrna's face, and her voice was soft. We are lower in the necropolis than is wise. Cleave to me, for both our sakes. Then she held out her hand. I wouldn't presume, Audric babbled, horribly ashamed for some reason. The presumption is mine. Myrna looked down the passage. If you're in contact with me, you may see things more clearly, until we reach the upper levels. I wonder if this is like a spell she's casting, like a D&D true sight kind of thing? I don't know. Audric took her hand. He was wearing his gauntlets, but warmth spread up his arm. What sorts of magics the Morn Watchers had at their disposal he didn't know, but the air seemed to steady. The corridor led into a tall room with pillars repeating in long lines like an arcade. To Audric's astonishment, streams of black water gurgled through the chamber via channels cut into the rock. It's like the Gardens of Youth in Starkhaven, he blurted. Myrna stepped over a stream. A visiting architect must have been inspired. So, by this, I'm confused. Does he mean that the Grand Necropolis was inspired by the Gardens of Youth, or that the Gardens of Youth was inspired by the Grand Necropolis? I'm a little confused with that one. Audric watched the streams ripple. They braided together at the end of the room, feeding into carved gaps in the wall, then sounded as if they'd turned into a waterfall. A duke had the gardens built over the resting place of his lover's ashes 300 years ago. Yeah, Neopho. I actually, the first time I read this, thought, oh, is this a budding romance thing? But no, it's just Audric being chill and respecting boundaries, which is nice. I'm so used to respect equating to love interest because it's like posing that respect must be for some ulterior motive, I guess. So to see it as simply being friendly is a nice difference. You are one for trivia. Emmerich would be delighted. Madam, Audric ventured, what's Lord Karn's mission? What does he want? Karn's temerarious flight. I'm not sure what that word is. I'll have to look it up. Karn's temerarious flight has something to do with the honor, supposedly, Myrna said as they picked up their way across the narrow channels. Nobility's intrigues never held any interest for me. Something itched at the back of Audric's mind at that, but the thought was shattered by a loud splash behind them. Madam! Hold! Something flopped out of one of the streams, inching forward. Pale blooms stretched and grasped in the air. Fingers, Audric realized, connected fans of scrabbling arm bones. But the streams were too shallow to accommodate that bulk of arms and hooked fingers. Madam! Behind me, Audric obeyed. Myrna added, Do not drop my hand. The thing kept oscillating out of the water, undulating more and more fused bones, nightmare fronds of something that was never alive. Water poured off a tangent of ribs that crusted up before them like a cobra's hood, crowned by a misshapen thing vaguely resembling a skull. It split open sideways, its gullet spiked all the way down its neck. This thing, I don't know if I desperately want to see it in the Veilguard or if I desperately do not want to see it. Myrna slapped it. Whip fast with an echoing crack, her hand caressed with emerald fire. We are permitted passage, she enunciated clearly. Leave. The thing's neck curled in confused anger, away from the Morn Watcher's flames. It hissed like shifting sand. The spell burning in Myrna's hand coiled into ropes, a lash or a whip, strangling cords. I will not ask again. The thing fluked back down into the murky waters. Audric realized he had been squeezing the Watcher's other hand far too tight and relaxed his grip. Thank you, Myrna turned, and only then did she shake her free hand with a wince. What bones? Like iron! Madam, Audric whispered, what was that thing? Uncatalogued, Mira said briskly. Emmerich will be thrilled to hear of it. Let us depart quickly. Uncatalogued, she says. Does that mean there are just random bone monsters haunting the Grand Necropolis that they have no idea about? Even the Morn Watchers? It makes me think of that scene in the trailer for the Veilguard with the giant skeleton that Emmerich was viewing up. I'm guessing that must be the Grand Necropolis, in which case, is there any relation to this, whatever this bone snake thing is, or something different? But I'm with Audric here, I gotta say, I would shit myself. I totally get that there are plenty of people who are very into that, though. So for those people, I hope it does exist, because I can stand it. It's just not my flavor. Audric's next few hours were a series of wonders and horrors, a grand delirium like those nightmares of his childhood. It's certainly going to be nicer than a broodmother, Neopho. Everything is nicer than a broodmother. He stood with awe in the arena-sized tomb of a warrior queen, carved with a riot of battles and feasts that cavorted on the stone. He shivered at the majesty of the flowering gates closing off a silent, enormous silver grave. He crossed a bridge made of giant's bones, over a pit of skeletons of a sort he did not recognize. He hid from a wheezing thing that dosed all the light around it, but left behind lingering gray shadows when it was done. I want to... As morbid as it is, I do want to explore a place like this. The description sounds so interesting, but I will do so with quaking fear. Just once, Audric had to let go of Myrna's hand. When a specter rushed him, everything had suddenly been much darker and disorienting. The Morn Watcher had dispelled the spirit while Audric clung to the sides of a grave. He'd felt as if the room were heaving. When she'd grabbed his elbow again, things snapped into focus. Not that Myrna's presence made the architecture less baffling. Corridors sprouted where there should have been no room between the walls. Stairs brought them to a higher landing than the ones they'd started on. At one point, they'd made their way through a maze of mirrors with sliding panels that led to smaller box-like rooms until they had to crawl. All the time, he had grabbed the Watcher's glove, and all the time, his mind worried about Lord Karn. Has Karn found what he wanted yet, madam? He may be occupied, Myrna said, as they traveled a gently sloping path past Tableau of the Dead. The carefully preserved corpses had been posed as they'd been in life, reenacting their daily rituals. Some even moved, albeit slowly. It's no easier for the dead to pass through some of these places than the living. Lord Karn must want this manner of honor settled very badly. Undoubtedly, Myrna replied. Have no fear. We draw closer to the upper levels. Audric felt it, a lightning in the air. The twists and turns of the passages were just as numerous, but the chambers were quieter. They even passed a few docile undead shuffling past harmlessly. After the exotic terrors below, Audric only felt mild aversion instead of his previous squirming fear. Myrna stopped abruptly. "That statue," she said. "How would you describe it?" Lapis lazuli carved in the Amor Tormente Arlesian style, holding a scepter. "Does it seem familiar?" I've seen woodcuts of the style, in books. Does it seem as if we passed it before?" "Oh, 4 times now." Myrna looked about as if the room would split up answers. "Something has foiled our direction." A voice spoke. Audric had heard it last in the cage of the lift. "Vanity, Watcher, to think you could stop the pride of his house." The Watcher sniffed. Her hand went to the velvet purse of the rib bone. "These games diminish us all, your lordship." "You will have nothing of me." Karn's voice seemed deeper, more resonant, Audric noticed. Was that how demonic spirits sounded, once they settled into a body? "I can feel you tugging with that little piece of rib, and dragging that wretched thing behind you." Audric cleared his throat. "I don't. We wish you no ill, Lord Karn." He was, in fact, imagining throttling what was left of the man's throat. Audric felt a sympathetic pain from the wound on his neck. "The Mourne Watch will cage me. Let me moulder on a shelf." Myrna's lips became a thin frown as she looked around, as if searching for the disembodied voice beyond the walls. Lord Karn. Something smashed through the ceiling. Audric was nearly crushed as a golem of lashed-together bones hit floor with a crack. It thudded towards them, effortlessly shoving aside the broken stone. A golem of lashed-together bones. So is this like of similar nature to the golems made by dwarves, but with like skeletons? Is this of similar nature perhaps to whatever the hell the harvesters were from the Golems of Angarak DLC and what Orsino turns into? Like, what kind of magic is holding these things together, man? Ooh, Neopho, that's an interesting theory. The necropolis was so close to the fate it starts to act like it. Ooh, I like that. I'm going to adopt that into my own catalog of theories, I think. Thank you. Audric heard Lord Karn's voice sneer. "I go to make my challenge, Watcher." Just before the golem's long bone glaive whistled down, Audric and Myrna dived in different directions. The golem swept the glaive back at head height. Audric was saved by ducking behind a fallen chunk of stone. He scrambled further as the golem advanced. Myrna started to dash to where he was. "Guardsmen, as in the lift, come to!" The golem slammed the glaive into the ceiling. Myrna barely tumbled clear of a slab of stone the size of a horse. The pouch containing the rib bone slipped from her hand, and the golem's blade sliced down. There was a crunch. Myrna winced, but kept moving even as the glaive spun. There was a ring of metal on metal as it hit Audric's spear. "Guardsmen!" For all Audric is saying, I mean, Audric's handling this pretty damn well. Audric barely deflected the golem's next sweep. The creaking monster had the strength of a rock slide. He fainted to the side. A second set of arms unfolded from the golem's chest, clutching knives. Holy shit. Audric parried the first, dodged the second. The main glaive swung back like a pendulum. Warm dizziness, a rush of cool stone. Audric gasped. They were in the room of smooth, dark green walls and tiny candles cupped in yellow glass. He could hear the golem stomping somewhere above them, glaive scraping the floor. A bony form in deep shelf on the room stirred at the sound. It looked at them reproachfully, then rolled back to its rest. The guardsman pushed himself up with a scrape. "Thank you, madam," he said. There was something subtly wrong about the depth of this place. Floor-length Serault glass mirrors, fixed in the green. See how the candles look like hovering stars. Serault glass mirrors. I don't know if anybody, Neopho, I don't know if you've played The Last Court, but Seralt is capable of repairing illuvians, apparently. Just saying. Myrna shook her head, brushing off her dress. Your endangerment is directly related to my folly. No, you came for me, madam, as I should. The sound of the golem faded. Either it had stopped or wandered away. Audric patted himself down. Would have been easy to leave me. So thank you again. His hand jittered against something cold. Guardsman? Sorry, something's... I don't know what. Guardsman, Myrna sounded regretful. Audric felt a sudden, inexplicable pang. I'm afraid this must be now. What must? Audric heard a strain in his voice. What's now? Look down. I don't know what you... Look down. Audric looked. The broken blade of the glaive was lodged straight through his dry, unbloodied, unbreathing chest. Oh. What a damn twist. The Chantry sisters that had schooled Audric were also Navarin. The nation's orthodoxy accepted that the Grand Necropolis was a fitting resting place for the bodies of all good souls destined to sit by the side of the Maker. The metaphysics of what would happen to his flesh, however, had been hand-waved. The spirit that would be placed there was not their providence, the sisters said. The city's necromancers would tend to that after his final hour came. Audric felt somehow cheated. He was still conscious after it had happened. When? He demanded. How long have I been? Has this... Guardsman Audric Felhausen died of his wounds after Lord Karn's funeral, Myrna sounded apologetic. His body arose the next morning and went to his old post. Your captain was at a loss. As you were incestate, he sent you to us to ease your passage. I'm not dead, Audric said as he grabbed at the blade in his chest. I'm myself. I'm not a spirit. I'm me. Audric staggered at the blade as the blade came out with a sickening crunch. Flakes of homemaker, dried blood came out with it. You are not quite what you were, if that's who you still aim to be. Please, stop. Stop talking like that, Audric trembled. How could the dead, no, not yet, tremble? Have you noticed your thoughts growing circular? Tell me about your life outside your love of art, Audric. Expound on any other topic. I can think just fine. His own hands, as if he took a gauntlet. What would he see? I'm Audric Felhausen, not some spirit going, using his body for a stroll. What have you thought since we embarked? Myrna asked patiently. What's impressed itself? The style of the place, the buildings, the frescoes, the statues, and Karn, always back to Karn. Many things, he said weakly. Myrna's look sliced clean through him. The truth, Guardsman Audric. He'd loved his books. He'd never had any pretensions to being a scholar. He'd simply wanted to collect and read for its own sake. After work, after a few drinks with the other guards, he'd slip away shyly to his apartment and read by lamplight and fire. He'd loved the comfortable silence of those nights, loved them more than anything else. This paints such a sweet picture of who Audric was, the real, I guess you could... Now there is a question. How do I differentiate between the living Audric and this Audric? Because real doesn't seem like an appropriate word, because for all intents and purposes, this is the real Audric now. I don't know. The living Audric. It paints a very sweet picture of the living Audric. It's sad that he died, but in a way he's still alive because this spirit has taken up his life. The human Audric and spirit Audric. I'm going to use that. Audric lurched over to a mirror. A hollow face sagged back at him. He groaned, and the sound, he now realized, was of a piece with the dead around him. His vision grew dim with a dry, throat-closing anger. This had been his life, and there'd been so little of it. Karn, that demon, whatever that thing was, had ended it without a thought. Audric wanted to rend the man limb from limb, crackling limb. Imagine his raking hands across that face, tearing everything and anything at all. A glove clamped on his shoulder. He felt the warmth of a living hand. You will not lose yourself. The voice was stern, a warning shackle. I forbid it. You are suited for better things than rage. For a moment, Audric saw his body, Myrna, and the green stonework from above, as he hovered his length outside them all. Then more of himself slid back into place. His sight grew clearer. The way that Audric slides so fluidly between, nudging towards rage versus, curiosity or whatever you want to categorize this spirit as, it's interesting to read it from his perspective rather than someone else's, because we see this spirit as being very personable. Very well done. This story is really one of my favorites, probably, if you can't tell. Yeah, it's not like some rule, Neopho. I agree. It's kind of like loose. It's not strictly defined as one spirit equals one demon. It's interesting how I would love to know more about how, say, a spirit of pride could maybe turn into a spirit of, like, I don't know, harmony, anything that's like peaceful. Because it must go the other way as well, I would think. It does, because in Dragon Age Inquisition Solus's Quest, a spirit of pride turns back into wisdom, if it's possible. So this just goes to show that the Mournwatch is probably correct in referring to them all as spirits rather than categorizing some as demons. Oh, I completely lost my place. Oh my goodness, where was I? You brought me here to watch me, he said, quietly bitter. The Mournwatch assists both the dead and the living. We wish to help you resolve what you are. What's that? Driven. Myrna squeezed his shoulder more consolingly, then stepped away. An entity as complete as you are is rare. Some of my colleagues argue the higher dead, such as yourself do, in fact, hold fast to their mortal souls. Others attest that this is impossible. They would say you are caught between two spirits, anger and curiosity. Whatever the case, you are unbalanced. Confronting Karn with you was my remedy. Audric let the glaive fall with a clatter. There was another groan from the nook in the wall. But Karn's golem crushed the talisman. Myrna looked up, as if replaying the scene. I cannot find him easily now. He mentioned honor, Audric said. It felt easier to think, strangely, now that he'd realized the body, my body, wasn't receiving leftover ideas about needing to breathe. The dizziness that had come on him was gone. He also said something about a challenge. It could be anything. A spirit of pride would fasten onto something crucial to Lord Karn's dignity. So you don't think he's gone to the Winged Halls to finish his duel with the man who killed him, Duke Janus? Audric asked. Myrna slowly closed her eyes. It just seems likely to me, madam. It was a moment before she spoke. You will excuse me. I am cataloging all the ways I've been a fool. Audric considered that. I don't think so, madam. I mean, I still like to find Lord Karn. He picked up his spear, dented but miraculously unbroken. Don't know if I can stop him myself from trying to fight him. I'll try. Good, Myrna set a mote of light into the nook in the wall. A moment later, a skeleton fell out, hissing and snapping. Myrna snagged it with a collar of green fire, tugging it like a leash. Does that hurt it? Audric asked, more sympathetic to the shambling thing that he'd been a minute ago. The sensations differ. With some of the dead, one must exert direct control. The skeleton subsided, making a strange whine. A message, the Morn Watcher told it. Find Professor Emmerich Volkaren. Tell him, after some last business in the winged halls, we shall be joining him above without delay. So she just sends this skeleton walking around the streets like, hey, I've got a message. Do you think that the average Navarian citizen just sees a skeleton walking down the road and thinking, oh, the Morn Watch has business, I see? Typical Navarian day, yeah. I love that. Apologies, I need another drink. Typical Morn Watch shenanigans. A large figure in golden armor hacked the last lock off an enormous mausoleum gate. It held out a hand, and the doors burst inward. The van, Markham Tomes, were spacious as mansions, ceilings carved with knights fighting dragons, rivers of wine pouring from goblets, all circling a skull over a throne. The horror shuffled to the first tomb, the most recently deceased of the line. It placed a propriety hand upon the lid, the triumphs of the flower of Navaran chivalry in stone. Karn whirled, eyes bleeding a purple light so deep it almost pulsed black. Audric gasped at the ceiling and rasped, commissioned by King Caspar himself. I've only seen plates. You preposterous nuisance, Karn stormed out, and swayed when he saw the Morn Watcher standing quietly beside the door. Desecrating one's own grave is one thing, Lord Karn. Defiling another's is vulgar. Janice Van Markham owes me a duel. A pantomime. You'll only wake more of the dead. Myrna looked at the hacked-off locks with distaste. I cannot let you draw more spirits here. Let them witness. Karn's shadow began to expand, a hulking shape at odds with the human frame holding a sword. The mark of the pride demon, Audric realized. Karn continued. The living that slighted me above are next, once Janus relearns his place. He's dead, Audric shouted, his words echoing around the chamber. Why could you care? You already killed each other. Karn brought his gaze back to the guardsman. The imprint of a larger presence swirled around the undead lord like an invisible storm of ash. What would you know of the price of higher stations? Audric felt his rage rush back at once. Whatever he was, dead man or imitation of a dead man, he knew what following it would mean. Survival, fury, perhaps oblivion when Myrna put him down. Internment in the city of the dead. But see how the vines of that ceiling curve around the turn into the flowers. It's so cute how Audric is now using what Myrna did for him to calm himself down. You slew me at your funeral, Audric hefted his spear. You owe me a duel first, Lord Karn. Only one of noble blood. Has killed today, Myrna said, equidistant from both men, but perhaps Lord Karn fears to fight. Karn was quiet for a heartbeat, then brought up his shield. Never. Karn was suddenly on Audric, slashing. Audric got what he knew was a lucky jab with his spear. It scraped off Karn's breastplate. The Revenant wasn't as strong as the Golem, but Karn was quick, applying the blade with neat, efficient strokes. Guardsmen! Stay back, Watcher, Karn spat. We duel as gentlemen, alone, with the weapons at hand. I'll be fine, Audric gargled. He was dimly aware his body wasn't tiring like a mortal man's, but it seemed absurdly unfair he could still feel so much fear. It's interesting that this fear is not leading to Audric switching into I don't know, like a fear demon or something. But he's still curiosity, or he's still in between curiosity and rage. Those obviously are more powerful, maybe, for him? I don't know. Karn feinted a sweep into a strike, and his sword punctured Odric's lung. A fatal blow if he'd been breathing. Odric pushed back, slamming his cross guard into Karn's helmet. Parted, the nobleman circled him, idly spinning his sword into a new stance. The match was his this time. I heard your babbling whenever you and the Watcher used that bone to look for me, Karn spat. A sad, sad thing. A spirit clinging to the dying curiosity of a man with a mania for baubles. You will die and fade into the marble halls of your betters from every single age. Chalcedony, not marble, Odric said automatically, used in funerary buildings since the reign of Queen Verland. You would keep quiet about that for one solitary. Odric's spear shot through Karn's throat, nearly beheading him. Karn shrieked and flung out a hand. An inferno of light blasted Odric across the room. You cur! You impudent worm! Magic dripped from Karn's fingers. The Watcher will find nothing of you but ash. A lasso of emerald fire whirled neatly around Karn's neck. Using magic breaks your own rules, Lord Karn. Myrna pulled with one arm. Karn fell back, clawing at his ruined throat. Your duel is forfeit. This whip that Myrna has is so cool. Like, I'm picturing almost something similar to like the spirit blades in Dragon Age Inquisition. You know, that you can pull out if you get that specialization. Except hers is, of course, green, and it's a whip or a rope or something, but damn, that's stylish. She's like a necromancer Catwoman. You cannot! Karn buckled and strained against the rope. Odric saw gargantuan shadows twist around Karn, casting the chamber in flickering, thrashing light. The nobleman raised a clawed hand that the rope started to fray, until Odric slashed the hand with his spear. Karn howled, and the rope reformed, tightening further. I can, Myrna said, nodding at Odric. Myrna drew Karn in, and Odric hurried him, jabbing and slashing before the nobleman could break the rope of fire. A gale rose. The force of the demon inside Karn cackled and flexed against the stone. Myrna calmly continued to pull, looking as if she was exerting no more effort than dragging a small but willful dog. Finally, she had Karn near enough to touch, his flesh smoldering around the rope. I did not permit you to duel Odric for your own satisfaction, Lord Karn, the Morn Watcher declared. What then? I allowed him, Myrna said sweetly, to see that pride is a cheat. Myrna yanked hard. Karn screamed, suddenly stopped. Odric staggered back to Myrna right as the gasping skull, helmet and all, rolled to his feet. The jittering shadows settled. The invisible presence that had filled Karn seeped away. The guardsman picked up the silent skull. What familiar teeth! And Odric placed it on Karn's fallen body, feeling nothing but sad relief. Excellent. Myrna tucked a stray hair back into place. The crypt's calm already. What now, madam? You heard my message to Emric. She crooked a finger, gesturing to Odric. Will be expected. It won't be difficult to return from here. Odric looked around. I'm allowed to come back with you? Of course. Myrna lifted her skirts and stepped over a chunk of stone from the fight. Emric will be put out if we don't both show up for tea. Hell yeah, tea with Emric. They were back in Emric's den. Odric can pretend to drink tea. He's allowed to be social and just chill with them while they enjoy the tea. But you're right, he probably doesn't eat or drink, because I do recall Cole saying I don't eat in Dragon Age Inquisition. And that's of a similar nature, I guess-ish. Like, nothing would happen if he ingested it, so... because he's got no working body organs. He can at least sniff the tea and enjoy the smell, yes. They were back in Emmeric's den. Audric had been astonished to see familiar tomes in a neat stack on the necromancer's desk. Those yours, yes, from your home. Emmerich shook his head. Forgive the liberty, guardsman. After you and Myrna left for the necropolis, I had to search for a reason you might have returned so unexpectedly. I believe we found it, Myrna said, from where she was overseeing Emmerich's manservant transfer the contents of a bubbling beaker into a bowl. Emmerich handed the top book to Audric. It was a gazetteer of Navarre City, stamped with a crowned skull surrounded by flowers. Audric flipped it open to read the blocky inscription. To our son with love, may you be blessed in your studies with the chantry. All this effort for me? I'm just a guardsman, sir. Was? Audric pushed doubt aside as he held the gazetteer to his chest. He existed, knew what he loved, and that had been loved, and that somehow seemed enough in the moment. The Great Leveler has no favorites, Emmerich smiled. Neither does the Mournwatch. You are faced with a choice, Myrna said, coming over. You have confronted your killer and recognized your driving passion. You may rest now, guardsman. Or you may work under the auspices of a watcher, Myrna said. Under a modicum of magical control. To avoid enemy, the bond must be given freely. To you, madam? If it's satisfactory. The guardsman ducked his head, and because of that felt inadequate, knelt on one knee and down on one hand. Myrna smiled slightly, took it. Emmerich coughed, looking away. Please, let the poor fellow up. What position were you thinking? I thought it was obvious. Audric felt slow excitement as he heard Myrna say, We have a great need for someone to take charge of the library. What a sweet ending. It also makes me wonder, is the relationship between Manfred and Emmerich of similar nature to what's going on with Myrna and Audric? Like, did we have a past adventure of Manfred and Emmerich out there somewhere? I want to know. It's bittersweet, Neopha, I would agree. You know, like, it's sad about human Audric what happened, but at the same time, I firmly believe that Spirit Audric is carrying on in his memory, and there's something that's really nice about that, because, like, from personal beliefs, you know, I do believe that in spirits, and the idea of that interpreted in a similar way in this story really appeals to me. I also find it very cool that the Mournwatchers are so chill about spirits. Like, they call them spirits, not demons. They ask for permission to, I guess, bind them. You know, they treat them with personhood. They treat them with respect, and that's something special too that you don't see taught in circles in Southern Thedas. So there's a lot to the Mournwatch that I have so many questions about, but I hope that we'll get answers in the Veilguard. This is one of those stories that really gets me pumped for the Veilguard because I feel like it's one of those stories that's going to get a lot of callbacks to. Anyway, this was a shorter one, but very enjoyable. This one's very nice for me. I had a great time reading it, and thank you everybody who joined, either in part or for the whole time. And I also especially like to thank anybody who has donated in the past or in the future, for that matter, to the cause that this is in relations to, which is the GoFundMe shown on the screen. Everybody have a good rest of your time. Thank you so much.